My name is Jason Miller, and I work night search and rescue out of the Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station in Yellowstone National Park. If you've ever driven through the north side of the park, you've probably passed our station without noticing it. It sits just off US Route 191, a few miles south of Gardner, tucked behind a gravel parking lot and a maintenance garage the size of a small warehouse. During the day, the place is busy. Rangers move in and out of the building, tourists stop to ask for maps, and parked trucks roll through the lot with coolers, radio gear, and toolboxes rattling in the back. At night, it's different. Most of the lights stay off, the front doors lock, and the only people still working are the rangers on the night rotation. That's where I come in. The night shift covers everything that happens in the park after most visitors have gone to sleep. Car accidents on Highway 89, injured hikers who stayed on the trail too long, campers who wander away from their sites after a few drinks and can't find their way back in the dark. A lot of the calls start the same way. Someone reports a missing person, or a vehicle sitting on the side of the road with the driver gone. Sometimes it's nothing. Someone takes a wrong turn, realizes their mistake, and walks back to the campground before we even get there. Other times, it's not nothing. Most nights, I work with one other ranger and a radio dispatcher inside the station. The trucks stay fueled and parked in a row beside the garage doors so we can get moving quickly. Each truck carries the same gear: trauma kits, rope bags, extra radios, thermal blankets, and floodlights that can turn a dark patch of forest into something that looks like a football stadium. When a call comes in, we grab the closest truck and we drive. If you've never been in Yellowstone after midnight, it's hard to explain how quiet the park gets. The main roads empty out. The campgrounds go dark, one by one. Even the animals seem to disappear for a while. The only sounds left are wind moving through the trees and the engine of the truck rolling along the road. That quiet is why the night shift exists. People underestimate how big Yellowstone really is. The park spreads across 3 states and more than 2 million acres of mountains, forest, rivers, and open valleys. Once the sun goes down, it becomes very easy for someone to step off a trail and disappear into that much wilderness. The official training manuals cover most of what we deal with: wildlife encounters, hypothermia, river crossings, how to organize a search grid when someone goes missing in rough terrain. I read all those manuals during my first week on the job. But there's another set of rules the manuals don't mention. I learned about those during my first night shift. The ranger who trained me was a guy named Kevin Derby. Kevin ran night operations out of the Tower Roosevelt Station and had been doing it longer than anybody else on the roster. On my first night, he walked me through the truck, showed me where the rescue gear was stored, and made sure I knew how to operate the radio system. After that, he handed me a cup of coffee and sat down across the table in the break room. "Before we start the shift," Kevin said, "there are a few things you should know." I assumed he meant the usual training stuff. Maybe certain trails where people got lost more often, or roads where tourists like to drive too fast at night. Instead, he gave me 6 rules. None of them were written down, none of them appeared in the training manuals, and every single one of them sounded ridiculous. One rule said if you saw a bear with glowing eyes, you were supposed to stay perfectly still. Another rule involved carrying green Tic Tacs during missing child searches. There was one about staircases in the woods that didn't make any sense at all. I remember laughing when he finished. Kevin didn't laugh. "Listen," he said, "you don't have to believe any of this. I didn't when I started either. But these rules exist because someone broke them once." He took a sip of coffee and looked out the window toward the dark trees behind the station. "Some of those people, they didn't come back." I didn't know Kevin well enough at the time to tell if he was joking or trying to scare the new guy. Most ranger stations have their share of stories, and Yellowstone is full of old ones. People disappear in big wilderness areas sometimes. Happens in every national park. But Kevin didn't tell those rules like a ghost story. He told them like procedures. 3 years later, I worked the same night shift he trained me on. I've responded to enough calls along the roads and trails north of Tower Junction to know how quickly a normal search can turn into something else. I've seen enough strange things in the woods to stop laughing when someone mentions the rules. If you ever work nights out here, you'll hear them eventually. And if you're smart, you'll follow them. The first one is about bears. Rule 1. If you see a bear with glowing eyes, stay perfectly still. It can't see you if you don't move. The first time I saw the bear was about 6 months after I started working nights. Late September, the kind of cold night where the air feels dry and sharp in your lungs. I was riding with Kevin Derby that evening. We just finished checking a stalled vehicle along Highway 89 near Gardner, and we're heading back toward the Tower Roosevelt station. About 2 miles before the junction, the radio crackled. "Tower unit, possible animal disturbance at Bear Creek Campground," the dispatcher began. "Campers reporting a large animal knocking over food lockers." Kevin reached over and turned the radio volume down a little. "That'll be a bear," he began. "Happens every week." We turned off the highway and drove north along a narrow campground access road. The headlights swept across empty picnic tables, metal food lockers, and a few parked RVs with their lights turned off. Bear Creek Campground is small compared to most places in Yellowstone. Maybe 20 campsites, a restroom building, and a gravel loop road that circles through a patch of pine trees. Kevin shut off the truck engine when we reached the center of the loop. "Let's check the lockers first," he said. We stepped out with flashlights. The cold air carried the smell of wet dirt and pine needles. Somewhere deeper in the campground, something metallic clanged. Kevin pointed his light toward the sound. "Probably got in someone's cooler." We walked down the gravel road toward a row of food lockers near a picnic table. One of the metal doors was hanging open, and trash bags were scattered across the ground. Kevin crouched beside the mess and inspected the claw marks on the locker door. "Big one," he said. And that's when I heard breathing. Slow and heavy. I turned my flashlight toward the road behind us. A bear stood about 30 yards away. At first, nothing about it seemed too unusual. It was a large black bear, maybe 6 feet tall when it lifted its head. Its fur looked wet along the shoulders, and its front legs were covered in mud. And then the eyes caught the light. They didn't reflect the beam the way animal eyes usually do. They glowed. Not bright, like a flashlight reflection. The color was dull and steady, like a green light buried deep inside the skull. The bear took a step forward. Kevin saw it the same moment I did. "Don't move," he said. The word snapped something loose in my memory. Kevin had mentioned this exact situation during my first week on the job. At the time, I thought it was a joke. If you see a bear with glowing eyes, stay perfectly still. The bear walked closer. Each step landed with a soft crunch on the gravel road. Its head tilted slightly from side to side, as if it were listening instead of looking. Kevin stood completely still beside the food locker. I forced myself not to shift my weight. The bear stopped about 15 feet away. It lifted its nose and sniffed the air. The smell hit me. Wet fur mixed with something sour, like rotting meat. The bear stepped toward Kevin, and Kevin didn't move. It circled slowly, passing within a few feet of him. The green glow in its eyes stayed fixed on the space in front of him, but its head turned strangely as it walked, almost like it was trying to locate something by sound. And then my boot slid on the gravel. Wasn't a full step, just a tiny shift, and the bear's head snapped toward me instantly. Before I could react, it changed. The animal covered the distance in 2 seconds. Its claws scraped across the road as it lunged straight at the spot where the noise came from. I froze. The bear stopped just inches from me, Its nose hovered a few inches from my chest. Hot breath poured out of its mouth. I could see scars along the side of its muzzle and patches where the fur had fallen away. The glowing eyes stared straight ahead, not at me, at the space where the sound had been. I didn't move. Seconds passed, and then the bear turned its head slightly and sniffed again. Its ears twitched toward the trees at the edge of the campground. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest. The bear spun toward the sound and charged into the darkness. The tree shook for a moment as it crashed through the underbrush, and then everything went quiet again. I let out the breath I'd been holding. Kevin finally moved. "Now you know why the rule exists," he said. I turned toward him, still shaking. "That thing almost killed me." Kevin shook his head. "No, you almost killed yourself." He walked back toward the truck and gestured for me to follow. "That animal can't see the way normal bears do. It hunts by movement and sound." I climbed into the passenger seat and shut the door. Kevin started the engine. "If you move, it finds you," he said. He pulled the truck back onto the campground road and drove slowly toward the highway. "And if you stay still, sometimes it doesn't." He glanced over at me once. "That's Rule 1. Rule 2. If you're searching for a missing child, bring green Tic Tacs. The first time I had to use that rule was the following spring. Early May, it's a strange time in Yellowstone. The snow starts melting in the valleys, the rivers run high, and the park begins filling with visitors again. Campgrounds reopen, the roads get busy, and the ranger station phones start ringing every hour with someone asking about weather, wildlife, or trail conditions. Most of those calls happen during the day. The bad ones, they usually come at night. The call came in a little after 9:30 p.m. I was sitting at the desk inside the Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station finishing paperwork from a medical call earlier in the evening when the radio cracked alive. "Tower unit, we've got a missing child at Pine Creek Campground." The dispatcher sounded calm, but the words made the room feel colder. "Age?" Kevin Derby asked from across the road. 7 years old, male, name is Tyler Cooper. Last seen about 20 minutes ago near the restroom building." Kevin stood up immediately. "All right," he said into the radio. "Notify park law enforcement and start logging units. We're on our way." He grabbed the truck keys from the hook beside the door and tossed them to me. "Let's move." We drove south along US Route 191 with the emergency lights flashing across the trees. Pine Creek Campground sits about 10 minutes from the Tower Roosevelt Station, tucked into a narrow patch of forest beside a shallow stream. When we arrived, 2 park law enforcement trucks were already parked near the campground entrance. A small group of campers stood near the restroom building, talking in quiet voices. A woman was crying. Kevin shut off the engine and stepped out of the truck. A ranger from law enforcement walked over. "Parents say the kid was playing near their campsite," the ranger said. "They looked away for a minute and he was gone." Kevin nodded. "Is there a trail nearby?" "Yeah," the ranger said. "Lost Lake Trail starts about a quarter-mile east." Kevin turned to me. "Grab the searchlights and your radio." I stepped out of the truck and opened the rear compartment where the gear was stored. That's when Kevin reached into his jacket pocket and held something out to me. A small plastic box. Green Tic Tacs. I stared at it. "You're serious?" Kevin didn't smile. "Take them." I slipped the box into my jacket pocket. Within 10 minutes, the search team had spread out across the campground area. Law enforcement covered the roads and parking lots, while Kevin and I headed toward the trail that ran behind the campsites. Lost Lake Trail begins with a narrow dirt path that winds through a patch of pine trees before climbing up toward the hills. Kevin stopped at the trailhead. "All right, you take the trail side, I'll work the ridge." I nodded. We switched on our flashlights, and we moved into the woods. The trail followed the creek for the first 100 yards before splitting into two directions. I took the path that stayed close to the water. The beam of my flashlight bounced across rocks, tree trunks, and patches of wet dirt. "Tyler," I called out. My voice disappeared into the trees. The only sound that came back was water moving slowly over stones in the creek. I kept walking. About 15 minutes into the search, the trail began narrowing as it curved around a small hill. The ground sloped downward toward the creek, and the trees grew thicker along the bank. I stopped and listened. Something moved above me. Wings. I tilted my flashlight upward. A crow sat on the wooden trail sign about 20 feet ahead of me. The bird watched me. It didn't fly away. I remembered Kevin mentioning the crow once during a conversation about missing persons. The Rangers had a nickname for it. They called it Tic Tac. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket, and I pulled out the small plastic box. The crow tilted its head at me. I opened the lid, and I shook a few of the green Tic Tacs into my hand, and then I crouched down and placed them on a flat rock beside the trail. The crow flew down immediately. It grabbed one of the candies in its beak, hopped back a step, and swallowed it. And then it looked at me. The bird lifted off the rock and flew deeper into the trees. I waited. About 20 feet ahead, it landed on a low branch and turned back toward me. I followed. The crow flew again. Each time it landed, it waited until I caught up before moving again. The bird guided me off the main trail and down a narrow slope that led toward a dry creek bed. The ground there was uneven and covered in fallen branches. And then my flashlight caught something blue. A jacket. I ran forward. A small boy lay on the ground beside a fallen tree trunk. His arms were wrapped around his stomach, and his face was pale under the beam of the flashlight. "Tyler," I said. The boy didn't respond. I knelt down and felt his neck. Pulse. Weak, but steady. His lips were dry and cracked. The ground around him was scattered with pine needles and dirt, like he tried to crawl before collapsing. I grabbed my radio. "Tower unit to command. I've located the missing child, alive but unresponsive. Coordinates near the creek bend east of Lost Lake Trail." The radio burst with replies as the other search teams moved toward my location. I looked back toward the trees. The crow was gone. Kevin reached me first with two other rangers carrying a stretcher. "Nice work," he said, as we lifted the boy carefully onto it. The boy opened his eyes slightly as we carried him up the slope toward the trail. Later that night, after the boy had been taken to the medical clinic near Gardner, Kevin and I returned to the ranger station. I set the empty Tic Tac box on the desk. "You want to explain that?" I asked. Kevin picked up the box, then turned it over in his hands. "Well, Tic Tac helps us find kids," he said. "Why?" Kevin shrugged. "I have no idea." He set the box back on the desk. "All I know is that the bird likes the green ones." Rule 3. If you see cats in the trees, do not turn your back to them. Back away slowly. I didn't believe that rule either the first time Kevin Derby mentioned it. At the time it sounded like common sense advice about mountain lions. Yellowstone has plenty of them. And most rangers know the basics. Don't run, make yourself look bigger, maintain eye contact. But Kevin was very specific about one part. Don't turn your back. Not even for a second, he said. The way he said it made it sound less like wildlife advice and more like survival instructions. I learned why a few months later. It was late August, near the end of the busy season, when the park still had tourists, but the nights were starting to cool down. Kevin had the night off that evening, so I was paired with another ranger named Adam Turner. Adam worked days most of the year and only picked up night shifts when the schedule got thin. Around midnight, the radio dispatcher called in a report from a group of hikers who'd returned late from Bear Ridge Trail. They said they heard something moving in the trees above the trail while they were hiking out. They didn't see what it was, but they said branches kept shaking over their heads the whole way down. Adam grabbed the keys to the truck. "It's probably a mountain lion," he said. We drove east along US Route 191 for a few minutes before turning onto the gravel access road that leads toward Bear Ridge Trail. The road runs along a stretch of forest where the trees grow thick and close together, blocking most of the moonlight. Adam parked the truck near the trailhead sign. "You ready?" he asked. I grabbed my flashlight and radio. We stepped onto the trail. Bear Ridge Trail climbs gradually into the hills east of the road. The path starts wide enough for two people to walk side by side, but after a few hundred yards, it narrows to a single track that winds between tall pine trees. The only sounds were our boots crunching on dirt and the wind moving through the branches above us. About 5 minutes into the hike, Adam stopped. Did you hear that?" I listened. Something moved in the trees, not on the ground. Above us, a branch shifted somewhere to our left. Then another branch moved farther ahead. I tilted my flashlight upward. 2 glowing eyes stared back at me from a thick branch about 20 feet above the trail. The shape behind the eyes looked like a mountain lion. And then another pair of eyes appeared on a different branch. And another. 3 cats sat in the trees above the trail, and all of them were watching us. Adam stepped backward. That's weird. Mountain lions don't usually travel in groups." One of the cats shifted its weight and moved along the branch. The movement was smooth and silent. Its body stretched across the limb like it'd been there for hours. Another cat climbed down slightly from its branch and crouched lower. Adam turned his flashlight toward it. "That one's big." The animal was easily larger than any mountain lion I had seen before. The beam of my flashlight moved across the trees. More eyes appeared. 4, then 5. The cats were spread out across the branches above the trail, all facing the same direction. Toward us. Adam took another step backward. I think we should get back to the truck," he said. "That's fine," I said. "Just don't turn around." He looked at me. "What?" "Don't turn your back," I said. Adam shifted his weight again. "Why?" But before I could answer, one of the cats moved. It didn't jump down. It walked along the branch above us, staying directly over the trail. The others followed. The cats were tracking our movement from above. "Okay," Adam began. "That's not normal." We started backing down the trail together. Our flashlights stayed pointed upward as we moved. The cats continued pacing along the branches, moving tree to tree above us. One of them dropped lower on the trunk of a pine tree until it was only about 10 feet above the ground. Adam stopped. "That thing's following us," he said. "Keep backing up," I told him. We moved slowly down the trail for another 30 yards. And then Adam made a mistake. He turned his head slightly and glanced behind him toward the direction of the truck. And one of the cats dropped from the branch instantly. The animal landed on the trail behind us with a heavy thud. Adam spun around. "Don't run," I said. The cat crouched low on the dirt path. Its tail flicked slowly behind it. The muscles in its shoulders tightened like it was preparing to jump. Adam froze. The other cats stopped moving in the trees above us, and everything went quiet. I slowly reached for the flashlight mounted on my belt and clicked it on. The second beam of light hit the cat directly in the face. It blinked once, and then it turned and leaped back into the trees. Within seconds, the rest of the cats disappeared into the darkness above the trail. Adam and I stood there for a moment listening. Nothing moved. We backed the rest of the way down the trail and reached the truck without saying another word. Adam didn't speak until we were halfway back to the ranger station. How many were there? I counted 5, I said. He stared out the window at the dark forest passing by. Mountain lions, they don't hunt like that. No, they don't, I said. When we reached the station, Kevin was sitting at the desk finishing paperwork from another call. He looked up as we walked in. You guys run into something? He asked. Adam nodded slowly. Cats, he said. Rule 4. If you hear dead relatives over the radio, turn the radio off and don't look outside for the rest of the night. The first time that rule mattered, I was alone at the Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station. Kevin had taken a day off, and Adam Turner was working a different district that night. That left me covering the radio desk and the truck bay until morning. Nights like that happen a few times every season, when schedules overlap or somebody calls out sick. The station sits just off US Route 191, north of the Lamar Valley area. After midnight, there's almost no traffic on that stretch of road. Occasionally a car passes, heading toward Gardner, but most nights the only vehicles moving through that part of the park belong to rangers or park maintenance crews. That night, a storm had moved through earlier in the evening. By the time midnight came around, the snow had stopped, but a thin layer still covered the ground outside the station. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the trucks parked beside the garage. Inside the building, everything was quiet. I sat at the radio desk finishing a report from a minor vehicle accident that had happened earlier along Highway 89. The heater hummed softly in the corner of the room. The radio stayed silent for nearly an hour, and then it clicked. First, I assumed it was just static. Radios in the park pick up strange interference sometimes, especially during bad weather. The speaker crackled once and then went quiet again. I kept writing. A few seconds later, the speaker clicked again. Jason? The voice was clear. It came through the radio speaker like a normal transmission. I froze. Jason, you there? The voice belonged to my brother, Mark Miller. He died in a car accident 4 years before I ever started working in Yellowstone. For a moment, I just stared at the radio. Jason? The voice said again. The transmission sounded slightly distorted, like someone speaking through a weak signal. I'm outside, the voice continued. Can you open the door? My eyes moved toward the front window of the station. Snow covered the ground outside the building. The porch light illuminated the wooden steps leading up to the entrance. The trees behind the station swayed slightly in the wind. No one stood on the porch. The radio clicked again. Jason, I'm freezing out here. The voice sounded exactly like him. Same tone, same rhythm in the way he spoke. For a moment, my chair scraped against the floor as I started to stand. And then something Kevin Derby had said months earlier surfaced in my head. If you hear a dead relative over the radio, turn it off and don't look outside. The radio crackled again. Jason, I know you can hear me. My hand moved toward the radio controls. The voice sounded closer this time, almost impatient. Just open the door. I shut the radio off. The room fell silent instantly. For a few seconds, nothing happened, and then I heard footsteps outside. They moved slowly across the wooden porch. The sound traveled along the front wall of the station toward the window beside the desk. I kept my eyes on the paperwork in front of me. Another step. Something stopped just outside the glass. I could feel a presence on the other side of the window without looking up. The porch light still cast shadows across the snow outside, but I refused to turn my head. The footsteps moved again. They circled the building slowly. Snow crunched beneath heavy weight as whatever was outside walked past the window, along the wall, and around the back of the ranger station. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes. The heater continued humming beside the desk. Outside, the footsteps moved around the building again. The sound passed the window a second time, then a third. Eventually, the noises stopped. I didn't move from the chair until the sky outside the window began turning gray with the early morning light. When the sun rose above the tree line, I finally stood and walked toward the door. I opened it slowly, and cold air rushed inside. The snow around the ranger station was covered in tracks. Large footprints circled the entire building. Each print was deep enough to show the shape clearly. They were human, but they were far too large to belong to any person. The track stopped directly in front of the door, right where the voice had said it was standing. Rule 5. If you see a staircase in the woods, burn it. I didn't see the staircase until my second year working nights in Yellowstone. By then I'd already dealt with the bear, the cats, and the radio incident. Those things had taught me that Kevin Derby's rules existed for a reason. I still didn't understand them all, but I'd stopped arguing about them. The staircase showed up during a missing hiker search. The call came in just after 11 p.m. A man named Daniel Foster had failed to return from a solo hike along Lost Lake Trail. His truck was still parked at the trailhead, and his campsite at Pine Creek Campground was empty. Several teams had already been working the area for several hours when Kevin and I arrived. 2 law enforcement rangers were checking the lower part of the trail, while a volunteer team worked the ridge above the creek. Kevin decided we would search the stretch of forest that runs between the trail and an old fire road farther east. We parked the truck near the trailhead, and we grabbed our gear. "Stick close," Kevin said as we stepped into the trees. The forest around Lost Lake Trail is dense even during the day. At night, the branches block most of the moonlight, leaving only narrow beams from our flashlights cutting through the dark. We followed a faint path running parallel to the main trail. The ground was soft with pine needles and patches of wet soil. Somewhere nearby, water moved slowly through the creek. For the first 20 minutes, we didn't find anything. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign the missing hiker had passed through the area. Kevin stopped near a cluster of large rocks. "Let's cut east," he began. "That fire road should be about 100 yards that way." We turned off the faint path and started moving through thicker trees. Fallen branches snapped under our boots as we pushed deeper into the forest. And then my flashlight hit something that didn't belong there. Wood. Straight lines. I stopped walking. Kevin?" He turned and followed the beam of my flashlight. A staircase stood in the middle of the woods. It was made of dark wood, maybe 10 steps tall, with narrow railings on both sides. The structure looked old but intact, like it'd been part of a house or a cabin at some point. Except there was no house, no walls, no foundation. Just a staircase rising out of the dirt. Kevin walked closer and shined his flashlight along the steps. The wood looked dry and weathered, but the edges were clean. No rot, no broken boards. "How does that even get here?" I asked. Kevin didn't answer. He walked around the staircase slowly, inspecting the ground near the base. There were no tracks, no tire marks, no debris from a collapsed building. Nothing. "Don't touch it," Kevin said. I stepped back. He reached into his radio pouch and switched channels. "Command, this is Tower Unit," he began. "We're shifting the search east of Lost Lake Trail. Possible structure located in the woods." The dispatcher acknowledged the message. Kevin clipped the radio back onto his jacket and looked at the staircase again. "We're burning it." I blinked. "What?" Kevin pointed toward the truck. "Gas cans in the back compartment." "You're serious?" "Yes." I jogged back toward the direction of the trail until the beam of the truck's headlights appeared through the trees. The gas can sat exactly where Kevin said it would be, beside the spare batteries and rope bags. I carried it back through the forest. Kevin was still standing near the staircase when I returned. He took the gas can and began pouring fuel across the wooden steps. The liquid soaked into the boards and dripped onto the dirt below. "Any idea what this is?" I asked. Kevin shook his head. "All I know is that we don't leave him standing." He handed the can back to me. "Step away." I moved several yards back through the trees. Kevin pulled a lighter from his pocket and flicked it open. For a moment, the flame illuminated the staircase clearly, and then he dropped the lighter onto the fuel-soaked wood. The fire spread instantly. Orange flames climbed the steps and wrapped around the railings. The dry wood cracked loudly as the heat intensified. I heard something move in the forest behind us then. A branch snapped, then another. Kevin didn't turn toward the sound. "Stay focused," he said. The staircase burned hotter as the flames climbed higher. Smoke drifted upward through the branches overhead. Something heavy moved through the trees again, closer this time. I turned my flashlight toward the noise. The beam caught nothing but trunks and leaves. The fire consumed the steps one by one. Boards collapsed inward as the structure weakened. And eventually the entire staircase fell apart. The last pieces burned down to glowing embers scattered across the ground. The forest went quiet again. Kevin kicked dirt across the remaining flames until only smoke remained. We stood there for a moment listening. Nothing moved in the trees. Kevin finally turned toward the direction of the trail. "All right, let's get back to the search." Well, we found Daniel Foster about an hour later, sitting beside the creek a half-mile away. He'd twisted his ankle and couldn't walk back to the trail on his own. As we helped him out of the stretcher, I glanced once toward the dark forest where the staircase had stood. Nothing was there anymore, just trees and dirt. Rule 6. If you take a picture and there's a person in it you don't remember seeing, burn the photo. Things can come alive through photos. The photo incident happened last fall. By that point, I'd been working nights out of the Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station for almost 3 years. I'd seen enough strange things in the park to stop questioning Kevin's rules. I didn't always understand them, but I followed him. The call that night started like a normal search. A couple reported hearing someone yelling near Bear Ridge Trail just after sunset. They said the voice sounded like it was coming from deeper in the woods, somewhere off the trail. When they tried to follow the sound, it stopped. Kevin and I drove out to the trailhead along US Route 191 and parked the trail near the entrance sign. "Probably someone just messing around in the trees," Kevin said. We grabbed our radios and flashlights and started walking the trail. Bear Ridge Trail runs through a narrow stretch of forest before climbing toward a rocky overlook that faces the valley. The lower section of the trail stays mostly flat and winds through thick pine trees. About 10 minutes into the search, Kevin stopped. "Take some photos," he said. "For what?" "For the report," he replied. "We document this area whenever we check a location like this." I pulled my phone out and turned on the camera. The flash lit up the trees ahead of us. I took a photo of the trail marker, then another of the surrounding woods. Kevin walked a few yards ahead and scanned the ground with his flashlight, while I took 2 more pictures showing the direction of the trail and the nearby trees. We didn't find anything unusual. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anyone had actually been yelling in that area. Kevin shrugged. "Probably someone down in the valley," he said. We walked back to the truck and drove to the next area the dispatcher wanted us to check. By the time we returned to the ranger station, it was close to 2 in the morning. Kevin went to the break room to grab coffee, while I sat down at the desk to start writing the incident report. Part of that process involved uploading any photos taken during the search. I opened the camera roll on my phone. The first photo showed the trail marker exactly the way I remembered it. The second photo showed the trees beside the trail. But the third photo made me pause. Someone stood in the background. The figure was partially hidden behind a pine tree, about 20 feet behind Kevin. I leaned closer to the screen. The man wore dark clothing and stood completely still. His face looked pale. I knew immediately that he had not been there when I took the photo. I would have seen him. Kevin walked back into the room carrying his coffee mug. "You finished the report yet?" "Look at this," I said. He stepped beside the desk and looked down at the phone. For a moment, he didn't say anything. And then he set the mug down slowly. "Scroll," he said. I swiped to the next photo. The same trail appeared on the screen, the same trees, the same spot behind Kevin. The man was closer now. He stood fully in the open now, facing the camera. Kevin grabbed the phone from my hand then. "Stop," he said. He walked to the printer beside the desk and connected the phone with the cable. Within seconds, the printer spit out the photo onto a sheet of paper. Kevin carried the printout outside behind the ranger station, where an old metal burn barrel sat beside the maintenance shed. He dropped the photo inside and struck a match. The paper curled as the flames spread across the image. For a moment, the man's face burned orange in the firelight, and then the photo turned to ash. Kevin watched the barrel for a few seconds before walking back toward the station. When I checked my phone again, the photo was gone. The camera roll jumped from the second picture straight to the fifth. The man had disappeared. Kevin picked up his coffee mug and sat back down at the desk. "Sometimes things notice you through pictures." And that was all Kevin told me. Now, most people think the dangerous part of Yellowstone happens during the day. They think about grizzly bears on hiking trails, tourists getting too close to bison, or someone slipping near one of the hot springs. The Park Service posts warning signs everywhere about those things. Rangers give safety talks. Visitors read pamphlets before heading out onto the trails. Those dangers are real. But night is different. When the sun drops behind the mountains, most of the park shuts down. Campground lights turn off. Visitor centers close. The roads empty out except for the occasional car heading toward Gardner or deeper into Yellowstone National Park. And that's when the night shift starts. The Tower Roosevelt Ranger Station stays open 24 hours a day, even when everything else goes quiet. Someone always monitors the radio. Someone always keeps a truck ready to roll if a call comes in. Sometimes those calls are normal. A driver hits a deer on Highway 89 and needs help getting off the road. A camper twists an ankle on Lost Lake Trail and can't walk back to the parking lot. A group of hikers misreads a map and ends up on the wrong trail after sunset. We handle those situations the way any search and rescue team would. We grab our gear, follow the trail, and bring back people safely. But the night rangers also deal with the other things. The things Kevin Derby warned me about during my night shift. Over the years, I've learned that those rules don't exist because someone thought they sounded interesting. Every one of them started with an incident report somewhere in the park's history. A ranger who moved when the bear got close. A search team that ignored the crow. Someone who ran when the cats came down from the trees. Someone who opened the door when the dead voice called from outside. Someone who climbed the staircase. Someone who kept the photograph. The details of those reports don't always make it into the official reports. Sometimes the paperwork just says a ranger went missing during a search or failed to return from patrol. But the people who work nights in Yellowstone, we know the rest of the story. Kevin Derby still runs the night shift most weeks. I've seen him give the same talk to new rangers that he gave me years ago. He sits across the table in the break room with a cup of coffee and explains the rules one at a time. Most of them laugh the first time they hear it. I did. And then they work a few night shifts in the park. And eventually something happens. Maybe they hear a voice on the radio that shouldn't be there. Maybe they notice something moving in the trees above a trail. Maybe they find a staircase where no building has ever stood. After that, they stop laughing. Yellowstone. It's one of the largest national parks in the US. Millions of visitors drive through it every year. They take photos, hike the trails, and watch wildlife in the valleys during the day. Most of them leave before the park gets truly dark. The few who stay overnight usually fall asleep inside their tents or RVs without realizing just how quiet the forest becomes around them. That quiet is when the night rangers start paying attention, because the wilderness doesn't belong to us after dark. We just patrol it.